Black belt asked a black woman to fight as a joke. What she did next silenced the whole gym. The moment that would forever change the atmosphere of elite martial arts academy began with a cruel joke and ended with a lesson no one saw coming. Sometimes respect isn't given until it's forcefully taken. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Rebecca Johnson stepped through the glass doors of Master Kim's Martial Arts Academy. Her sneakers worn thin, but her presence unassuming. The familiar scent of sweat and disinfectant greeted her as she entered the bustling space where dozens of students practiced their forms. She came every week to pick up her daughter Maya. Yet tonight, the air buzzed with something heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. She tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear and scanned the room, trying to locate Maya among the sea of white uniforms. Parents lined the walls, some scrolling through phones, others watching with intense focus as their children practiced. Rebecca preferred to stay in the background, avoiding unnecessary attention. Years of practice had made her nearly invisible when she wanted to be. The walls echoed with shouts, the slap of feet on mats, and the sharp commands of Tyler Griffin, the instructor whose pride in his black belt was only matched by the sharp edge of his voice. His 6-foot frame moved with practiced precision as he demonstrated a complex kick, his black belt contrasting sharply against his crisp white uniform. The students watched in awe, desperate to earn his rare nods of approval. "Higher! I said higher!" Tyler barked at a young boy who struggled to execute the move. "If you can't do this by now, maybe you should try ballet instead." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, but Rebecca noticed how the boy's shoulders slumped in defeat. Rebecca spotted Maya in the second row, her brow furrowed in concentration as she mirrored the instructor's movements. At 12 years old, Maya showed remarkable discipline, her kicks precise and powerful despite her small frame. Pride glimmered in Rebecca's eyes as she watched her daughter execute a perfect roundhouse kick, only for a knot of worry to tighten as she caught Tyler's impatient scowl aimed straight at her daughter. "Johnson! Your stance is sloppy. Fix it or sit out," he snapped, singling Maya out despite her flawless execution. Maya adjusted her position, though Rebecca could see nothing had been wrong with it in the first place. The girl's face remained neutral, but Rebecca recognized the subtle tightening around her eyes, the same expression Maya had worn too often lately after class. Rebecca's fingers curled into a fist at her side before she consciously relaxed them. She'd been noticing a pattern in Tyler's behavior, but had tried to dismiss it as her own overprotectiveness. Now, watching him praise a white student for the same move he'd criticized Maya for, the reality became harder to ignore. Something would have to change, and soon. Rebecca settled onto a bench at the edge of the training area, pretending to check her phone while her attention remained fixed on the mat. The harsh fluorescent lights cast stark shadows across the dojo as students moved through their forms. Her thumb scrolled mindlessly through emails she'd already read, her peripheral vision tracking Tyler Griffin's movements with the precision of a hawk. She noticed it again, that subtle shift in his demeanor whenever he approached the students of color. With Jackson, a lanky 13-year-old with deep brown skin, Tyler's voice took on an edge that cut through the air. "Higher! I said higher! Are you even trying?" His patience evaporated like morning dew under a scorching sun. Yet when Kevin, a blond boy with similar skill level, made the same mistake moments later, Tyler's correction came with an encouraging pat on the shoulder. "Oh, almost there, buddy. Just a bit more focus." The pattern repeated itself throughout the class. Maya executed a perfect front kick, her technique flawless, yet Tyler barely acknowledged it. When Emma, a girl with fair skin and auburn hair, performed the same move with wobbling balance, he praised her improvement. "Coach Griffin's tough, but his students move up fast." A woman in designer athleisure whispered to Rebecca, misreading her intense observation as concern. "But my son's been here 3 months and already testing for his next belt." From 2 benches over, a father with deep worry lines etched around his eyes leaned forward. "My kid says he always gets singled out," he murmured, voice barely audible above the shouts and slaps of the training session. "Comes home, asking what he's doing wrong. I tell him nothing. But—" He trailed off, shoulders slumping with the weight of an all-too-familiar burden. Rebecca's heart clenched, the injustice stinging anew. Her fingers tightened around her phone as memories of her own childhood flashed through her mind. The constant need to be twice as good, work twice as hard, yet still face twice the criticism. Now her daughter was walking the same thorny path. She caught Maya's eye across the room and offered an encouraging smile, even as anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. Tyler barked another harsh correction at Maya, his voice carrying across the dojo like a whip crack. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay quiet for now. This wasn't the time or place. But as she watched Tyler's continued pattern of subtle discrimination, something hardened inside her, a decision crystallized, clear and sharp as diamond. She wouldn't let this continue much longer. For Maya's sake, and for all the children who deserved better, something would have to change. Class ended with a final bow, and Maya bounded over to her mother, sweat-slicked but smiling. Her dark curls had escaped from her ponytail, framing a face flushed with exertion but glowing with accomplishment. Unlike some of the other children who dragged their feet after the intense session, Maya seemed energized, her eyes bright with excitement. "Great job, sweetie," Rebecca said, brushing a stray curl from Maya's brow and masking her unease with a gentle smile. She helped her daughter gather her things, noting how Maya's uniform was slightly askew from the rigorous practice. "I saw that side kick you landed. You've been practicing." "Coach Griffin said my form still needs work," Maya replied, her voice dropping slightly. "But I did better than last time." She bent down to tie her sneakers, missing the flash of concern that crossed her mother's face. Rebecca nodded encouragingly, though her stomach knotted as she recalled the harsh correction Tyler had given Maya earlier, far more severe than what he'd offered the other students for similar mistakes. "Practice makes progress," she said, zipping up Maya's gym bag, "and you're making plenty of that." As they walked toward the exit, Rebecca felt the weight of eyes on her back. She turned slightly, catching Tyler's gaze from across the room. The black belt instructor stood with arms crossed, his expression morphing from neutral to something darker as their eyes met, a sneering glance that burned between their shoulders like a laser sight. It was a silent dare, a challenge wrapped in contempt. The message was clear: you don't belong here, neither does she. Rebecca turned away, guiding Maya through the glass doors with a protective hand on her shoulder. The evening air felt cool against her heated skin, a welcome relief from the suffocating tension inside. She took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to slow. "Can we get ice cream?" Maya asked, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. "Jasmine said her mom takes her after every practice." "Not tonight, honey," Rebecca answered, forcing lightness into her voice. "But maybe this weekend we can—" As they walked to the car, Rebecca's mind replayed Tyler's look, his subtle dismissals, the way his eyes narrowed whenever Maya executed a move perfectly, as if her success somehow offended him. She had ignored these signs for weeks, telling herself it was just his teaching style, that she was being oversensitive. But the resolve in her chest hardened with each step. The quiet voice that had always told her to keep her head down, to not make waves, was being drowned out by something stronger, something that had been dormant for too long. Next time, she wouldn't let it slide. The next day, Rebecca arrived 20 minutes early for Maya's class. She chose a seat in the far corner of the viewing area, her posture deliberately casual, but her eyes laser-focused on the training floor. Parents filtered in, nodding politely as they passed, unaware of the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. Tyler strode onto the mat with his chest puffed out, black belt tied immaculately around his waist. The children lined up, backs straight, eyes forward. Rebecca noticed how Maya's shoulders tensed slightly when Tyler walked past her row. "Begin your warm-ups," Tyler commanded, pacing between the rows as the students started their jumping jacks. His gaze lingered critically on certain students, particularly Jackson, a quiet 9-year-old boy whose parents often worked late shifts. "Jackson, higher jumps! You're being lazy today," Tyler barked, though Rebecca could clearly see the boy was putting in just as much effort as everyone else. Meanwhile, a few positions down, a blond boy named Ethan was barely lifting his feet off the ground, yet Tyler passed him with an encouraging pat on the shoulder. The pattern continued through kicking drills. When Jackson's form slipped slightly, Tyler made him repeat the exercise in front of everyone. "This is what happens when you don't practice at home," he announced to the class. Minutes later, Ethan made the same mistake, but Tyler simply adjusted his stance with a friendly smile. "There you go, champ. Much better." Rebecca's jaw tightened. She glanced around at the other parents. Some nodded approvingly at Tyler's discipline, while others, mostly parents of color, exchanged knowing looks but remained silent. One mother caught Rebecca's eye briefly before looking away, her discomfort evident. During partner work, Tyler paired Maya with a much larger student, offering no guidance when she struggled. Rebecca watched her daughter's face fall with each harsh criticism, each dismissive gesture. The familiar weight of injustice pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. "You need to be stronger, Maya," Tyler called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just don't have what it takes." Rebecca's fist curled inside her jacket pocket, her knuckles white with restraint. She had spent years teaching Maya to hold her head high, to work twice as hard, to never let anyone make her feel small. Yet here was this man, systematically chipping away at her daughter's confidence, and not just hers. As class ended and the children bowed out, Rebecca made her decision. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle cruelties, they would not continue. Not for Maya, not for Jackson, not for any child under Tyler's watch. Enough was enough. Something had to change, and Rebecca realized with absolute clarity that she would be the one to change it. The class ended with a sharp clap of Tyler's hands, sending students scurrying to bow and collect their belongings. Maya trudged toward Rebecca, her shoulders slumped in a way that made Rebecca's heart ache. The usual bounce in her step was gone, replaced by a heaviness that had no place in a 12-year-old's demeanor. "You okay, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked. Already knowing the answer, Maya nodded unconvincingly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Coach Griffin said my form was sloppy today. He made me do 20 extra push-ups in front of everyone while he counted really slow." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Rebecca noticed the red marks on Maya's palms from the extra exertion. She pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, feeling the slight tremble in Maya's body. The hug said everything words couldn't. "I see you. I believe you. I'm here." Maya melted into her mother's arms, drawing strength from the silent comfort. "Jackson got it worse," Maya whispered against Rebecca's shoulder. "Coach made him stand in the corner for messing up a sequence, but Emma did the exact same thing, and he just corrected her nicely." Rebecca stroked Maya's hair, her jaw tightening. She'd witnessed it all from her spot on the parents' bench, the subtle differences in how Tyler addressed the children, the extra scrutiny some received while others sailed through with gentle guidance. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. As they gathered Maya's water bottle and bag, Rebecca felt the weight of eyes on her back. She turned to find Tyler staring directly at them from across the dojo. His expression wasn't just dismissive, it was challenging, a silent dare wrapped in contempt. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in what might have been a smirk before he turned away to high-five one of his favorite students. The drive home was quieter than usual. Maya stared out the window, lost in thought, while Rebecca's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. After dinner and homework, after tucking Maya into bed with reassurances that tomorrow would be better, Rebecca sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Rebecca's mind replayed every slight, every unfair correction, every moment Maya's confidence had been chipped away by Tyler's targeted criticism. She thought of the other parents who noticed but said nothing. She thought of Jackson's defeated expression. She thought of Tyler's smug, daring look. Enough, she whispered to the empty kitchen. Her decision crystallizing in the quiet darkness. Next time wouldn't be like all the times before. Next time she wouldn't just sit and watch. Next time she would act. Rebecca arrived at the dojo the following week with a quiet determination burning inside her. The atmosphere felt different immediately, tenser, charged with anticipation. Parents lined the walls in greater numbers than usual, whispers circulating about Tyler's increasingly harsh treatment of certain students. As the class finished their warm-up exercises, Tyler clapped his hands 3 times, the sharp sound cutting through the air like a knife. "Everyone, gather around," he commanded, his voice carrying that familiar edge of superiority. "Today, we're going to do something special." The students formed a circle in the center of the mat, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Maya glanced nervously at her mother, who offered a reassuring smile from her spot against the wall. "A black belt isn't just about knowing moves," Tyler announced, pacing the circle with his hands clasped behind his back. "It's about understanding real combat situations. It's about instinct." He paused dramatically, scanning the faces of his students. "Today, I want to demonstrate what real skill looks like." Several parents exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the usual curriculum. Rebecca felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine as Tyler's gaze swept across the room and landed directly on her. "Miss Johnson," he called out, his lips curling into what might have been mistaken for a friendly smile, if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Maya's mother, would you mind helping me with this demonstration?" A hush fell over the room. Maya's face drained of color as she looked frantically between her instructor and her mother. "I promise I'll go easy on you," Tyler added with a smirk that sent ripples of uncomfortable laughter through the room. His intention was clear, to humiliate the quiet woman who had been watching him too closely. Rebecca felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Some parents looked embarrassed, others curious, a few even seemed to enjoy the spectacle. She recognized the trap for what it was, a public attempt to put her in her place, to reassert his dominance not just over the students, but over the parents who questioned him. Instead of shrinking away, Rebecca met Tyler's gaze steadily. Her face remained perfectly calm, betraying none of the emotions churning beneath the surface. The laughter died in the throats of those who had joined in, replaced by an uneasy silence as they witnessed her unwavering composure. "Of course," she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the dojo. "I'd be happy to assist." Tyler's smile faltered slightly at her ready acceptance, but he quickly recovered, gesturing for her to join him on the mat. As Rebecca stepped forward, her resolve was unbreakable. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Maya tugged desperately at Rebecca's sleeve, her small fingers trembling. "Mom, please don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmurs rippling through the dojo. The fear in her daughter's eyes made Rebecca's heart clench, but something deeper, a fire long dormant, had already ignited within her. Tyler stood in the center of the mat, arms crossed over his chest, his black belt tied with meticulous precision around his waist. His challenge hung in the air, dripping with condescension. The smirk on his face told the whole story. This was designed to humiliate her, to put the quiet black woman in her place in front of everyone. "Come on, Mrs. Johnson," he called out, his voice carrying that false sweetness that made Rebecca's skin crawl. It'll be educational for the kids to see what happens when someone with no training faces a black belt. A few parents chuckled nervously, while others looked away, uncomfortable with the spectacle unfolding before them. Rebecca gently removed Maya's hand from her sleeve and squeezed it reassuringly. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, her worn sneakers silent against the polished floor. The fluorescent lights caught the determination in her eyes as she approached the mat. "All right," Rebecca's voice rang out, clear as a bell, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I accept your challenge." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room, taking in every parent, every child. "But let's make this interesting. If you lose, you'll apologize to every student and parent for your disrespect." The room froze. Parents who had been whispering fell silent. Students who had been giggling stared open-mouthed. The air grew taut with disbelief. No one had ever spoken to Tyler that way, let alone challenged his authority or skill. Tyler's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he recovered, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Bold words from someone who's never stepped on a mat before. Do we have a deal?" Rebecca pressed, her voice unwavering. The other instructors exchanged glances. Master Kim, the elderly owner who had been observing from his office doorway, stepped forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Tyler's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected this quiet woman to accept his challenge, much less set terms. His pride wouldn't let him back down now, not with everyone watching. "You do fine," he said, his voice harder now. "And when I win, you'll admit in front of everyone that your daughter needs to work twice as hard to keep up." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Maya's face crumpled, but Rebecca's expression remained calm, betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside her. "Deal," she said simply, stepping onto the mat. Tyler's confident smirk faltered for just a moment before he recovered, puffing out his chest and adjusting his black belt with exaggerated precision. The fluorescent lights of the dojo cast harsh shadows across his face as he processed Rebecca's challenge. "Fine," he announced, voice carrying across the now silent room. "If I lose, which won't happen, I'll apologize to everyone." He made a sweeping gesture toward the students and parents. "But when I win, you'll admit publicly that proper martial arts take years of dedicated training, not just showing up to watch from the sidelines." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some parents exchanged knowing glances, while others whispered behind cupped hands. Rebecca noticed how the room had subtly divided, the parents of color watching her with newfound interest, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They'd seen Tyler's treatment of their children firsthand, recognized the subtle differences in his tone and patience. On the other side, several white parents scoffed openly, one man shaking his head as if witnessing something embarrassing. "This'll be over in 30 seconds, he muttered to his wife. Maya rushed to Rebecca's side, her small fingers digging into her mother's arm. "Mom, please don't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's going to hurt you. He's a black belt." Rebecca knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down Maya's cheek. The fear in her daughter's eyes cut deeper than any physical blow could. Around them, the dojo buzzed with excitement and skepticism, but Rebecca focused only on Maya's worried face. "Sweetie," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "Sometimes we can't back down, even when we're scared, especially when something important is at stake." She squeezed Maya's hands in hers. "I'll be okay. I promise." Master Kim, the elderly owner who had been observing from his office, stepped onto the mat. His weathered face revealed nothing as he looked between Tyler and Rebecca. "This demonstration will follow proper protocols," he announced firmly. "No excessive force. This stops immediately if I say so." He gave Tyler a particularly pointed look before turning to Rebecca. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Johnson?" Rebecca stood, smoothing her simple T-shirt. She nodded once, resolute. Tyler rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. playing to the crowd with a wink toward his favorite students. "Don't worry, everyone. I'll make this educational." His voice dripped with condescension as he added, "And I'll try not to embarrass you too badly in front of your daughter, Mrs. Johnson." The room held its collective breath as Rebecca stepped onto the mat, her ordinary sneakers a stark contrast to Tyler's professional gear. But something in her calm, measured movements made even the most skeptical observers lean forward in their seats. That night, Rebecca sat alone in her living room, the house quiet except for Maya's gentle breathing from down the hall. She cradled a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her mind drifting to places she'd locked away years ago. The challenge at the dojo had cracked open a vault of memories she'd tried desperately to forget. She reached for a worn shoebox hidden at the back of her closet, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. "Silent storm strikes again," one headline proclaimed, showing a younger Rebecca, arm raised in victory, her face fierce with determination. For 5 years, she had dominated the MMA world, known for her deadly calm, before unleashing devastating technique. Opponents feared her not for brute strength, but for the eerie stillness that preceded her perfect attacks. Rebecca traced the outline of her former self in the photo. That woman seemed like a stranger now, confident, unstoppable, whole, before everything shattered. "I miss you, Marcus," she whispered to the empty room. Her brother had been her rock, her trainer, her biggest believer. The night before her championship fight, the one that would have cemented her legacy, Marcus had been driving to deliver her lucky raps. A drunk driver, a rain-slicked road, a moment's distraction. The police officer's words still echoed in her ears. He died instantly. She'd walked into the arena the next day, numb with grief, and suffered the only knockout of her career. The physical pain paled compared to the emptiness inside. Within weeks, she'd disappeared from the fighting world completely, changing her last name and moving across the country. No one questioned Rebecca Johnson, the quiet single mom who kept to herself. For 8 years, she'd buried the silent storm, channeling all her passion into raising Maya and building a normal life. She'd avoided anything that might reveal her past. Until now. Rebecca pulled out her old championship belt, the metal cold against her fingertips. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar. "Marcus, I won't run anymore," she whispered, a new determination hardening her gaze. Tyler's arrogance, his discrimination, his attempt to humiliate her. It had awakened something she thought was long dead. She stood up, moving through a shadow combination in her living room, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. Each movement flowed with precision that hadn't dulled with time. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about putting Tyler in his place. It would be about reclaiming a part of herself she'd abandoned in grief, not just for her own sake, but for Maya and every child who deserved better. The moonlight filtered through the blinds as Rebecca sat alone in her bedroom, the house quiet except for Maya's gentle breathing down the hall. She opened the bottom drawer of her dresser, pushing aside folded sweaters to reveal a box she hadn't touched in years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. There it lay, her championship belt. The gold gleamed even in the dim light, the metal cold against her fingertips as she traced the engraved words. World Champion. Memories flooded back in waves, the roar of the crowd, the cameras flashing. Her name announced to thunderous applause. The Silent Storm, that's what they called her, not because she was quiet, but because her attacks came without warning, devastating and precise. "I never thought I'd look at this again," she whispered to the empty room. Behind the belt lay a framed photo of Marcus, his arms slung around her shoulders after her second title defense. His smile had always been brighter than hers, his belief in her unwavering. "You'll be the greatest of all time, Becca," he'd told her that night. 3 days later, his car skidded off an icy road. The call came an hour before she was set to defend her title for the 3rd time. She fought anyway, won, and never stepped into the ring again. Rebecca lifted the belt from its resting place, feeling its substantial weight, both physical and emotional. "Marcus, I won't run anymore," she whispered, determination hardening her gaze. "I've been hiding for too long." She thought of Maya's face at practice, how the light in her daughter's eyes dimmed a little more each time Tyler singled her out. She thought of Jackson and the other children who deserved better. Tomorrow wasn't just about putting a bully in his place. It was about standing up when standing up mattered. Rebecca placed the belt on her bed and walked to her closet, pulling out a simple black training outfit she hadn't worn in years. Her muscles remembered as she moved through a few basic stances, her body flowing with a grace that had never truly left her. She knew tomorrow's match would be more than a spar. It would be a reckoning, not just for herself, but for Maya and every child like her. Tyler's arrogance had awakened something she'd buried alongside her grief, her voice, her power, her responsibility to use both. "This ends tomorrow," Rebecca said, her reflection in the mirror showing not just a mother, but the champion who had never really disappeared. The silent storm was about to break her silence. The dojo buzzed with anticipation as word had spread about the unusual challenge. Parents lined the walls, some smirking with expectation of entertainment, others shifting uncomfortably. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide with curiosity. The air felt electric, charged with whispers and sidelong glances as Rebecca entered through the double doors. Tyler stood in the center of the blue mat, his black belt tied with meticulous precision around his waist. He stretched dramatically, each movement calculated to showcase his physique and training. His supporters nodded appreciatively while he performed a series of impressive warm-up kicks that sliced through the air with audible whooshes. "Glad you could make it," he called out to Rebecca, his voice carrying across the room. "I was worried you might reconsider." His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. Rebecca walked forward with quiet dignity. No fancy gear, no intimidating entrance, just a simple grey t-shirt and black sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face remained a mask of tranquility. She placed her water bottle at the edge of the mat and stepped forward, her worn sneakers making no sound against the padded surface. Maya sat between two friends, her fingers nervously intertwined, eyes darting between her mother and her instructor. The conflict of loyalties was written across her young face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tyler announced, playing to the crowd, "I've agreed to give Ms. Johnson here a little demonstration of proper technique." Scattered laughter rippled through his supporters. "Don't worry," he added with a theatrical wink. "I'll be gentle." Without warning, Tyler launched into a dazzling display of martial arts prowess, spinning kicks, lightning-fast punches, and acrobatic movements that stopped mere inches from Rebecca's face. Each near miss drew gasps from the audience, and his final roundhouse kick halted so close to her cheek that several parents flinched. But Rebecca didn't move. Not a step back, not a startled blink, not even a quickened breath. She stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Tyler's. Completely unimpressed by his theatrics, the laughter that had begun to bubble up suddenly died. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room, as everyone noticed what Tyler was just beginning to realize. Rebecca wasn't intimidated, not even slightly. "That was quite a warm-up," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silence. "Are you ready to begin now?" Tyler's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face as he registered the complete absence of fear in her eyes. Something in her stance, in the perfect stillness of her posture, suddenly seemed less like the awkward rigidity of a novice and more like the controlled patience of a predator. Rebecca moved with an almost supernatural awareness, her body shifting just enough to avoid Tyler's attacks without wasting an ounce of energy. Where he lunged, she wasn't. Where he struck, she had already vacated the space. It wasn't that she was fast, though she certainly was, but rather that she seemed to read his intentions before even he fully formed them. The audience watched in growing fascination as Tyler's flashy techniques met nothing but air. His first few misses had drawn chuckles from the crowd, who assumed Rebecca was simply lucky, but as the pattern continued, those laughs faded into a stunned silence. "Stand still and fight," Tyler growled under his breath, just loud enough for Rebecca to hear. His face had reddened, not from exertion but from embarrassment. Each failed strike chipped away at the carefully constructed image he'd built in this dojo. Rebecca's expression remained placid, almost meditative. She didn't taunt or mock him with words. Her evasions spoke volumes on their own. Parents exchanged glances, some covering their mouths in surprise. The children watched wide-eyed, particularly those who had felt the sting of Tyler's harsh criticism after a particularly aggressive combination that left him off balance. Tyler stopped, his chest heaving. Sweat beaded on his forehead while Rebecca hadn't broken a sweat. The contrast was striking, his disheveled appearance against her composed demeanor. "Aren't you going to fight back?" he snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. The question hung in the air, revealing his frustration more clearly than any missed punch could. Rebecca's eyes met his, calm and clear. "I'm just waiting for you to show me everything you've got," she replied, her voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent dojo. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Maya watched from the sidelines, her hands clasped tightly together, a mixture of fear and pride battling across her face. Other students who had suffered under Tyler's biased treatment leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Tyler's jaw clenched. Rebecca's words weren't just a challenge. They were an assessment. She was treating this as an examination, and somehow, impossibly, he was the student being tested. The realization stung worse than any physical blow could have. He circled her again, recalibrating his approach. His earlier showmanship had evaporated, replaced by a desperate determination to land just one clean hit, to prove to himself and everyone watching that he deserved the respect his position commanded. Rebecca's stance shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. She was ready for whatever came next, her patience seemingly infinite. The audience fell completely silent, tension crackling in the air like the calm before a storm. Tyler's face contorted with rage as he launched a barrage of attacks at Rebecca. His strikes grew increasingly wild, each one fueled by mounting frustration and wounded pride. A roundhouse kick sliced through the air where Rebecca's head had been just a split second earlier. She had moved, not dramatically, but with such precise economy of motion that it seemed almost supernatural. "Stand still and fight," Tyler snarled, his voice cracking with anger. Sweat poured down his flushed face as he threw a flurry of punches that should have connected but somehow never did. Rebecca remained calm, her breathing steady and controlled. She glided across the mat like water flowing around stones, each movement just enough to avoid contact but never excessive. Her eyes remained fixed on Tyler's, reading his intentions before his body could execute them. She hadn't thrown a single counterattack, yet she dominated the exchange completely. The parents lining the walls exchanged nervous glances. What had begun as entertainment, watching their children's intimidating instructor teach a lesson to an ordinary mom, had transformed into something entirely different. Several mothers leaned toward each other, whispering behind cupped hands. One father, a former boxer himself, stared with his mouth slightly open, recognition dawning in his eyes. "She's toying with him," murmured Jackson's father to another parent. "Look at her footwork. That's not beginner's luck." Maya watched from the sidelines, her expression a mixture of fear and growing amazement. She had never seen this side of her mother before, this absolute command of space and movement that made Tyler, with all his belts and trophies, look clumsy by comparison. Tyler's attacks grew more desperate. He attempted a lightning-fast combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Rebecca simply wasn't there when his strikes arrived. She moved with such fluid precision that she seemed to anticipate his every move, her body shifting just enough to make him miss by millimeters. The more Tyler pressed his attack, the more obvious the disparity became. His techniques, impressive against students and in demonstrations, appeared crude and telegraphed against Rebecca's refined movement. His breathing grew ragged, while hers remained steady and controlled. "And who is she?" one of the senior students whispered to another. The atmosphere in the dojo had transformed completely. What began as mockery directed at Rebecca had evolved into something approaching reverence. Even those who had laughed at Tyler's initial challenge now watched in stunned silence, witnessing a masterclass in martial arts that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with perfect, effortless control. Rebecca hadn't thrown a single strike. Yet she was undeniably winning, not with force, but with a mastery so complete it made Tyler's black belt seem like a child's costume. Tyler's face had turned an alarming shade of red as beads of sweat cascaded down his temples. His breathing grew increasingly labored, each exhale carrying a frustrated grunt that echoed through the now silent dojo. What had started as a demonstration meant to humiliate had transformed into his own public undoing. "Now stand still and fight back," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he launched another wild combination of punches that sliced through empty air. Rebecca remained calm, her movements economical and precise. She didn't dodge with dramatic flair or unnecessary steps. She simply wasn't where his strikes landed, as if she could read his intentions before his muscles even tensed. Her eyes remained locked on his, unwavering and serene, which only fueled his growing rage. "This is ridiculous," Tyler spat, attempting a sweeping leg kick that left him dangerously off balance. Rebecca merely shifted her weight, watching as he stumbled to regain his footing. She still hadn't thrown a single counterattack, hadn't needed to. Around the perimeter of the mat, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The parents who had initially snickered at Rebecca's expense now watched with widened eyes and hushed voices. The children sat cross-legged, completely entranced by the display of skill they were witnessing. "No one moves like that without serious training," whispered James, a father who had been attending the dojo for years. "Look at her footwork. It's perfect." Another parent nodded slowly. "She's not even trying. She's just waiting." Maya sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a complex mixture of worry and pride. A few of her fellow students glanced at her with newfound respect, as if seeing her, and by extension, her mother, for the first time. Tyler attempted a spinning back fist, a move he often used to intimidate his younger students. The force behind it would have been devastating had it connected, but Rebecca simply tilted her head back by the smallest margin, letting his knuckles brush past her chin by millimeters. The control was astonishing. "Who is she?" someone whispered. Master Kim himself had emerged from his office. Drawn by the unusual silence in his typically boisterous dojo, he stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched Rebecca's masterful defense. Tyler's frustration had reached its breaking point. His techniques grew increasingly wild and undisciplined, the very flaws he criticized in his students now on full display in his own movements. His balance faltered, his timing disintegrated, and with each failed attack, the respect in the room shifted palpably away from him and toward the quiet woman who had yet to throw a single punch. The whispers around the room had transformed completely from ridicule to awe. Something profound was happening before their eyes, not just a physical contest, but a reckoning of assumptions, prejudices, and misplaced pride. Sensing she'd made her point, Rebecca decided it was time to end this charade. Tyler's frustration had reached its boiling point. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment as his attacks continued to meet nothing but air. The crowd watched in stunned fascination as this unassuming mother, who moments ago they'd pitied, moved with the fluid grace of water around stone. Tyler stepped back, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow. His eyes narrowed as he prepared his final assault, the spinning kick he'd perfected over years, the move that had won him countless tournaments. Parents leaned forward, some covering their eyes, others unable to look away. Maya clutched the sleeve of another student, her knuckles white with tension. "Let's finish this," Tyler snarled, his voice carrying across the now silent dojo. Rebecca simply nodded, her stance relaxed, yet perfectly balanced. As Tyler launched into his attack, his body twisting with practiced precision, time seemed to slow. His leg extended in a powerful arc that would have broken boards, or bones, had it connected. But Rebecca was already moving. With timing honed through thousands of hours in the ring, she shifted just 6 inches to the right. Her hand found his ankle with a touch so light it seemed impossible it could have any effect. Yet that feather-light contact, applied at exactly the right moment and angle, was all it took. Physics did the rest. Tyler's own momentum became his undoing as Rebecca redirected his force with masterful economy of movement. One moment he was airborne. The next, he was crashing onto the mat with a thunderous impact that seemed to shake the entire building. The collective gasp that filled the room gave way to absolute silence. Not a whisper, not a breath. Even the children stood frozen, wide-eyed at the sight of their intimidating instructor sprawled ungracefully on his back. The wind knocked completely from his lungs. Tyler blinked up at the ceiling, disbelief etched across his features. He tried to rise but could only manage to prop himself up on his elbows, his equilibrium still spinning. His eyes found Rebecca's, confusion replacing his earlier arrogance. "How did you—" he began, unable to complete the thought. Rebecca stood calmly, not a hair out of place, not even breathing hard. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The black belt instructor disheveled and defeated, the ordinary woman composed and unruffled. Parents exchanged glances of astonishment, while students whispered in awe. Tyler remained on the mat, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. His carefully constructed image had crumbled in seconds, shattered by a woman he'd foolishly underestimated. The humiliation was complete, not because he'd lost, but because he now understood just how thoroughly outclassed he had been from the very beginning. Rebecca stood over Tyler, who remained on the mat, his face flushed with embarrassment. The entire gym had fallen into a stunned silence. She extended her hand to him, not as a gesture of dominance, but of respect. After a moment's hesitation, Tyler accepted it, allowing her to help him to his feet. "True strength isn't arrogance," Rebecca said, her voice gentle yet firm enough to carry throughout the silent dojo. "It's humility and respect for others." Her words hung in the air, simple but profound. Tyler couldn't meet her gaze. His eyes fixed on the floor as his carefully constructed image crumbled around him. The black belt that had once been his shield of superiority now felt heavy around his waist. Someone in the back of the room began to clap, slowly at first, a tentative acknowledgement of what they'd witnessed. Others joined in, the applause building like a wave until it filled the entire gym. Parents who had watched silently for months as their children were belittled now stood tall, their faces alight with vindication. Students whose potential had been dismissed based on the color of their skin exchanged glances of newfound hope. Maya pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca opened her arms, and her daughter rushed into them. "Mom," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "That was amazing." These weren't tears of fear or embarrassment as Rebecca had worried they might be. They were tears of pure pride. Maya looked up at her mother with new eyes, seeing not just the quiet, supportive parent who attended every practice, but a woman of extraordinary strength who had stood up when it mattered most. Master Kim stepped forward from where he had been observing at the edge of the room. His expression was solemn but approving as he nodded to Rebecca. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying over the diminishing applause, "the most important lessons in martial arts have nothing to do with technique." Tyler finally raised his eyes, the arrogance that had defined him now replaced with something raw and uncertain. The transformation was visible, a man forced to confront his own prejudices in the most public way possible. Rebecca recognized that look. It was the face of someone standing at a crossroads. The energy in the room had shifted permanently. Parents who had never spoken to each other were now exchanging contact information. Children who had been intimidated into silence were laughing freely. Rebecca's victory had done more than expose one instructor's bias. It had cracked open the possibility of what this community could become. As the crowd began to disperse, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For years, she had hidden her strength, believing that chapter of her life was closed. Now she understood that true strength never disappears. It simply finds new ways to express itself. Tyler pushed himself up from the mat, his movements stiff with wounded pride. The silence in the dojo pressed down like a physical weight, as every eye watched him struggle to his feet. His black belt, once worn with such arrogance, now seemed to hang heavy around his waist. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but it wasn't from physical exertion, it was the cold sweat of humiliation. He cleared his throat once, twice, the sound echoing against the walls. The children sat cross-legged on the mat, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. The parents stood with arms crossed, waiting. Rebecca remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed yet dignified, giving him the space to find his words. Tyler began, then faltered. He looked at the floor, then at the students of color he had belittled for months, and finally at Rebecca. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I let my prejudice blind me. I thought I knew what strength looked like, but I didn't understand it at all." Rebecca's face softened, not with pity but with understanding. She nodded once, acknowledging his words without diminishing their importance. "It's never too late to learn," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "That's what martial arts is truly about. Not dominance, but growth." Maya stepped forward and stood beside her mother, chin raised, eyes bright with unshed tears. The other students looked at each other, uncertain at first, then with growing relief. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the room, as if everyone had been holding their breath for months. Master Kim, who had been watching from the doorway of his office, walked slowly to the center of the mat. His weathered face was solemn as he placed one hand on Tyler's shoulder and the other on Rebecca's. "Today we have all witnessed a true lesson," he said, "one that cannot be taught with kicks or punches." Parents who had been silent for too long began to speak quietly among themselves. Jackson's father stepped forward, extending his hand to Tyler. "My son deserves better," he said firmly. "We all do." Tyler took the offered hand, his grip uncertain but sincere. "Yes, sir. You're right." The atmosphere in the dojo transformed, as if a storm had passed and left clearer air in its wake. Children who had been shrinking themselves began to stand taller. Parents who had been considering pulling their kids from the academy exchanged looks of cautious hope. Something fundamental had shifted in that space, not just for Tyler, not just for Rebecca and Maya, but for everyone present. The truth had been spoken aloud. And in that acknowledgement lay the possibility of real change. "My mum is the silent storm, 3-time MMA world champion." Maya's voice rang through the dojo, pride radiating from every syllable. The declaration hung in the air for a moment, as all eyes darted between the beaming daughter and her composed mother. A parent in the back row scoffed, "No way!" But already, phones were emerging from pockets, fingers tapping frantically across screens. The quiet murmurs quickly transformed into gasps and exclamations as search results populated their screens. "Oh my God, it really is her," whispered one father, turning his phone to show the others. The screen displayed a younger Rebecca, arms raised in victory, championship belt gleaming around her waist. The resemblance was unmistakable despite the years that had passed. Rebecca, Silent Storm, Johnson, undefeated for 3 consecutive years, read another mother aloud. Her voice, tinged with awe, disappeared from the fighting world after a personal tragedy. Tyler stood frozen, his face draining of color as he scrolled through article after article. Videos appeared showing Rebecca demolishing opponents twice her size with the same effortless grace she had just demonstrated, the same calm focus, the same unwavering composure. She retired at the height of her career, someone announced, right before the championship match that would have made her the most decorated female fighter in history. Rebecca stood quietly, neither confirming nor denying, simply holding Maya's hand as the truth washed over the room. Parents who had dismissed her, who had averted their eyes when Tyler singled out children of color, now couldn't meet her gaze. Their assumptions about who she was, what she was capable of, what she represented, crumbled before their eyes. "Dee, why didn't you say something?" one of the mothers finally asked, her voice small with embarrassment. "Would it have changed how you saw the children being mistreated?" Rebecca answered softly. "Would it have made injustice more worthy of your attention?" The question hung heavy in the air. No one had an answer. One by one, parents and students approached Rebecca, offering handshakes, apologies, and words of admiration. Some apologized for staying silent when they should have spoken up. Others simply nodded in respect, words failing them entirely. Maya squeezed her mother's hand, beaming with pride. "I always knew you were a champion," she whispered. "Not just because of your belt." Rebecca smiled down at her daughter. The true reason she had found the courage to step back into the light. In that moment, surrounded by newfound respect and the weight of revealed truth, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet peace of standing fully in her power, no longer hidden in the shadows of her past. Rebecca knelt down and wrapped her arms around Maya, their embrace speaking volumes in the now quiet dojo. "Thank you for giving me strength," she whispered into her daughter's ear, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the reason I found my courage again." Maya beamed, her eyes shining with a pride that made Rebecca's heart swell. For years, she had hidden her past, believing it was the only way to protect her daughter from the pain that had once consumed her. But now, standing tall with her true self revealed, she realized that her greatest gift to Maya wasn't protection. It was example. From the corner of the room, Tyler watched the scene unfold, his usual swagger replaced by a humbled posture. The defeat had stripped away more than just his pride. It had peeled back the layers of prejudice he hadn't even recognized in himself. He approached them slowly, his steps hesitant. "I've never seen anyone move like that," he admitted, genuine respect replacing his former condescension. "I'd like to learn, not just techniques, but how to be better." The words cost him, but Rebecca saw the sincerity behind them. In the weeks that followed, Master Kim's academy transformed. The walls that had once echoed with subtle bias now resonated with genuine encouragement. Students of all backgrounds trained side by side, their differences celebrated rather than merely tolerated. Parents who had once whispered concerns now spoke openly, creating a community where respect flowed freely. Tyler, under Rebecca's occasional guidance, evolved as an instructor. He learned to see potential in every student, not just those who reminded him of himself. His teaching style softened without losing effectiveness, firm but fair, demanding excellence while providing the support to achieve it. "Coach Griffin helped me perfect my roundhouse today," Jackson told his mother one evening. The same boy who had once borne the brunt of Tyler's unfair criticism. He said, "I have natural talent." The transformation rippled outward. Parents who witnessed Rebecca's quiet stand began examining their own lives, where they stayed silent, where they could speak up. Children learned that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it was the steady voice that simply said, "This is wrong, and I won't accept it." Rebecca found herself teaching a special weekend class, not focused on fighting techniques, but on inner strength and resilience. The hardest battles, she told her rapt audience, are fought within ourselves, against our own fears and doubts. As she guided students through meditation exercises, Rebecca caught Maya watching from the doorway, her face glowing with admiration. In that moment, Rebecca knew that by reclaiming her identity, she hadn't just changed a dojo, she had shown her daughter what it meant to stand in your truth, even when your voice shakes. As Rebecca and Maya walked out of the dojo together, the golden light of sunset painted their silhouettes against the parking lot. Maya's hand slipped into her mother's, a gesture that felt different now, filled with newfound admiration. "Mum, you were amazing in there," Maya said, her voice still tinged with awe. "I never knew you could do that." Rebecca smiled, the weight she'd carried for years finally lifting from her shoulders. There are many parts of ourselves we keep hidden, sometimes even from those we love most. She squeezed Maya's hand. "I'm sorry, I never told you about that part of my life." "Why did you stop fighting?" Maya asked as they reached their car. Rebecca paused, keys in hand, memories washing over her. "After your Uncle Marcus died, the ring felt empty. Every victory felt hollow without him there to see it." She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "But today reminded me that strength isn't just about winning medals or championships." The parking lot had nearly emptied, but a few families lingered, casting respectful glances their way. One mother approached hesitantly, her son, a boy who'd often been on the receiving end of Tyler's harsh treatment, at her side. "Thank you," the woman said simply. "My son has been talking about quitting for weeks. Today changed that." Rebecca nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. As they drove home, the streets familiar yet somehow new, she realized that her victory had rippled beyond the dojo walls. Her phone buzzed with messages from old friends who'd recognized her name in social media posts about what happened. "What will you do now?" Maya asked as they pulled into their driveway. "Will you go back to fighting?" Rebecca turned off the engine and sat in the quiet darkness. "No," she said finally. "That chapter is closed, but I think I might start teaching, not just martial arts, but what it truly means to have strength." She turned to her daughter, the kind that stands up when it matters most. That night, as Maya slept, Rebecca stood by her window, looking out at the neighborhood she'd chosen for its quietness, its normalcy. She'd hidden here, thinking she was running from pain. But today had shown her that perhaps she'd been waiting instead, waiting for the moment when her voice and her strength would be needed again. The silent storm hadn't disappeared after all. She had simply been gathering power, learning patience, and finding a new purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Rebecca was ready to face them, not with fists, but with the quiet, unshakable resolve that had always been her true strength.